Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time and wander through the silent streets of cities once teeming with life. You know, the kind of cities where the air was thick with the scent of incense and the sounds of the marketplace. But here's the thing, these cities, the mighty Maya metropolises, are eerily empty now. And no, there wasn't some cataclysmic explosion or a storm that wiped them off the map. No, they simply disappeared, one by one, without a word, without a trace. Imagine that, huh? A bustling city left to slowly crumble under the weight of its own silence. You probably won't survive this journey unless you're prepared to dive deep into the mysteries of what happened to these once great civilizations. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and the time. Let's see just how far these ancient mysteries reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin with how the Maya rose from the ancient jungles of Central America to become one of the most advanced civilizations of their time. You're standing in one of their cities now, surrounded by grand stone structures. The air smells faintly of earth and wild flowers. In front of you, the towering pyramid of Tikal stands, a monument to the gods and the heights of human ingenuity. The Maya were skilled farmers, astronomers, and mathematicians. Their cities weren't just places to live, they were a reflection of their complex understanding of the cosmos. They built grand observatories, mapped the stars, and created a calendar so precise it still baffles scientists today. But none of that would have helped them prepare for the storm that was coming. The Maya, at their peak, ruled from the jungles of Guatemala to the lowlands of Mexico. Tikal, Palenque, Copan, these were some of the greatest cities in the Maya world. But the thing is, nobody really talks about why they vanished. Cities that once thrived suddenly became empty, their once bustling marketplaces now silent. Historians still argue whether this disappearance was a slow, drawn-out decline, or if something more sudden happened, something that we're still struggling to understand. As you stand there, taking in the sheer grandeur of the ancient city, the sounds of life echoing through your mind, let's look at the Maya at their peak. The golden age of the Maya was a time of extraordinary development. The civilization flourished between the 6th and 9th centuries AD, and if you could have been here during this time, you'd witness a society where the air was alive with purpose. The streets would have been filled with traders, priests and commoners, all bustling about their daily routines, their lives intricately connected to the movements of the stars and the pulse of the earth beneath them. The Maya were unmatched in their knowledge of astronomy. They crafted some of the most advanced calendars of their time, marking every event in time from the mundane to the celestial. The intricate carvings on stone monuments would record these events, from royal births to the celestial alignments that mark their agricultural cycles. The cities were built to mirror the stars themselves, aligning with specific celestial events. Palenque, for example, was perfectly aligned with the summer solstice. The Maya understood that time was cyclical, an eternal dance between the heavens and the earth. You would also be amazed at their architecture. Massive stepped pyramids reaching toward the sky like giant hands stretching to touch the stars. These pyramids were not just buildings. They were temples dedicated to gods, rulers and ancestors, places where the Maya could align themselves with divine forces. The Maya were a deeply religious society, and their faith in their gods and their connection to the natural world was reflected in every aspect of their cities. Everything had a purpose. The layout of the buildings, the positioning of the temples, even the colours used in their murals. But as impressive as all this might seem, there were cracks beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether the Maya civilization's fall was due to internal political turmoil, environmental collapse, or a combination of both. Was their advanced knowledge enough to protect them from the forces of nature that would eventually tear their society apart? Or did their increasing complexity and reliance on specific resources leave them vulnerable to forces beyond their control? It's a mystery that still perplexes historians to this day. The Maya civilization wasn't just about cities, it was about a world view, a world where time was sacred, where the earth was alive, and where every single action had a cosmic significance. Yet, despite all their brilliance, the Maya couldn't predict the end of their own cities. And in that silence that followed their disappearance, the echoes of their once great society still call to us. Imagine it. The Maya cities, once filled with the pulse of life, now sit in eerie silence. There's no grand exit, no tragic battle or cataclysmic storm that marks the end of this era. No, the Maya cities were abandoned, not in a rush, but in a quiet, gradual retreat. Over time, the once great urban centres of the Maya world, Tikal, Palenque, Copan, went from bustling metropolises to ghost towns. Streets once alive with chatter, trade and ceremonial processions now lie under a blanket of vines in the slow creep of time. You'd think it would be something dramatic, right? Maybe an invasion or a natural disaster. But no. The Maya didn't just fall overnight. No. The cause of their sudden silence remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Historians still debate the exact reasons for this abandonment. Some argue that the cities fell into decay due to a series of prolonged droughts. Others claim that internal political strife fractured the society. Some even think the Maya simply gave up, turning inward as they faced mounting pressure from all sides. Yet no clear answer emerges. It's as if the cities just decided to stop speaking, as if their once mighty rulers simply chose silence over the chaotic noise of their crumbling world. But what exactly was it that caused this sudden disappearance? Well, let's take a step back. The Maya had reached the peak of their civilization. With advanced knowledge in astronomy, mathematics and agriculture, they seemed unstoppable. Their cities stretched high into the jungle, their pyramids reaching for the heavens, their political system complex and deeply rooted in religious practices. And yet, within a few centuries, most of the great city-states were abandoned, leaving behind only empty structures and the faint memory of what once was. What was it that could break a civilization so grand? Historians still argue over what exactly triggered this abrupt shift. Some say it was climate, an unexpected drought that turned fertile lands into arid deserts. The Maya, who depended heavily on rain to sustain their agriculture, might have faced a period of severe droughts that caused crops to fail, water sources to dry up, and famine to set in. But was this the sole reason? Others claim it was a combination of environmental decline and internal conflict. You see, the Maya weren't just battling the elements, they were fighting among themselves. The political systems of the Maya city-states were based on complex alliances between powerful noble families. When these alliances fell apart, war became inevitable. The rivalries between cities like Tikal and Calakmul became bloody affairs. Could it be that constant warfare wore down the resources of the cities, causing them to crumble from within? This combination of social fragmentation and environmental stress could have been the perfect storm that led to their eventual demise. The truth is, there is no clear-cut explanation, and some historians even question if we'll ever truly know. After all, the Maya left us only ruins and fragmented records, just enough to leave us wondering what might have been. And as we look at the ruins today, we are left with an overwhelming sense of silence, as though the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for us to uncover its secrets. Now let's dig a little deeper into one of the most compelling explanations for the Maya's sudden silence: climate change. Imagine the weather, year after year, slowly shifting. What was once a predictable rhythm of seasons becomes erratic. You can almost feel the heat intensifying, the winds less reliable and the rains failing. For a civilization like the Maya, who relied heavily on the cycles of nature, this was nothing short of disastrous. You stand in the midst of an ancient city, and you can almost feel the desperation of the people as they watch the skies, waiting for rain that never comes. The Maya lived in a delicate balance with the environment, using their advanced knowledge to predict agricultural cycles and track celestial events. But as we now know, the Earth doesn't always play by the rules. What was once a lush landscape of dense jungles and fertile soils turned into something much harsher, something they couldn't control. Long periods of drought plagued the region, and historians believe these droughts could have been a key factor in the Maya's downfall. The cities that once thrived by the riverbanks or nestled in fertile valleys now found their water sources dwindling, and the crops that sustained them were no longer reliable. The Maya, once so attuned to the land, suddenly found themselves in a battle they couldn't win. Could the droughts have been the sole factor? Some believe the Maya could have adapted, learned to survive without their traditional water sources, but it's not so simple. Agriculture, after all, was the foundation of their society. Without consistent rainfall, the once thriving farms were no longer able to produce enough food to support the population. This led to famine, social unrest, and a breakdown in the delicate balance that held their cities together. And yet, Historians still debate just how much of a role climate change played in this collapse. Was it the droughts that drove the Maya from their cities? Or was it merely the final straw in a society already teetering on the edge? The answer remains elusive, but one thing is certain. The Maya were victims of forces beyond their control. And when the rains stopped coming, so did their once great civilization. It wasn't a battle fought with weapons. It was a war waged by the very environment they relied on. You can almost feel the tension in the air. The once thriving city is now struggling to survive. What would it have been like to witness the slow death of the Maya world? No dramatic battle, no sudden collapse, just the quiet, relentless march of time as the earth took back what it had given. The ruins stand now as a silent testament to that struggle. As you continue walking through the jungle, the towering ruins of the Maya civilization loom large before you, silent and imposing. The majestic temples, once bustling with life, now slowly fade into the overgrown foliage that surrounds them. But the decline of the Maya wasn't just a result of environmental challenges, it was also due to the unsustainable pressures their society had placed on itself. Imagine a city that grew too fast, where the population ballooned and the resources were stretched thin. The Maya had built some of the most complex societies in the world, but this very complexity created its own set of problems. Agriculture was the heart of the Maya economy. They were skilled farmers with vast knowledge of the land, using advanced techniques to grow crops like maize, beans, and squash. But as the population swelled, the demand for food increased exponentially. The fertile land that once supported them began to show signs of strain. The forests, once abundant with resources, were cleared to make way for more crops, more settlements, and more people. Over time, this deforestation became so severe that the land could no longer regenerate. The soil, once rich and fertile, became eroded and less productive. You can almost hear the crunch of the dried, cracked earth beneath your feet as the land slowly gave way to the demands of an ever-growing population. The Maya were trapped in a cycle. They needed more land to sustain their growing numbers, but their efforts to expand only depleted the very resources they depended on. As the soil eroded, the ability to grow enough food became increasingly difficult, and hunger began to set in. Historians still argue over the extent to which overpopulation and resource depletion contributed to the collapse, but it's clear that the Maya were facing an untenable situation. It's easy to imagine the frustration of the farmers who could no longer depend on the once fertile land to yield the crops they needed to feed their families. Without enough food, people began to suffer. And when food becomes scarce, societies start to unravel. The rich and powerful in the cities may have had access to resources, but the common people, those who worked the fields, began to feel the pressure first. It's in these moments of scarcity that social tension begins to rise and the cracks in society widen. In a world where survival was directly linked to the land, what happens when that link is severed? The results were catastrophic. With the land no longer able to provide the bounty it once had, the Maya turned inward, searching for solutions. Some may have believed that their gods were angry, punishing them for their disregard of the natural world. They turned to religion for guidance, hoping for divine intervention. But despite their best efforts to appease the gods, the droughts continued, and the land remained barren. Historians still debate whether the Maya saw their environmental degradation as a sign of divine displeasure, or whether it was simply the result of their own unsustainable practices. Regardless of the cause, the fact remains that the Maya were caught in a cycle of overpopulation, resource depletion, and environmental collapse that ultimately led to the downfall of their great cities. The cities that once thrived as centres of culture, power, and wealth now stood as abandoned monuments to a society that had overreached. The grand pyramids and temples built with such care and precision now lay buried under layers of soil and vegetation. It's a haunting image, isn't it? The Maya, who once had the world at their fingertips, unable to turn the tide of their own demise. They had reached the limits of their resources, and there was no turning back. Now, imagine you've been living in this once great city of the Maya. The constant rhythm of trade, the exchange of goods, the celebrations, the sacrifices, and the sacred rituals, these have all defined your life. But recently there's been something else. You've heard whispers in the streets of unrest, murmurs of power struggles between the ruling families. The air feels thicker now, not just with the heat, but with tension. The political system, once a well-oiled machine, seems to be breaking down. The alliance that held the city together, between the priesthood, the nobility and the warriors, has splintered, and now, even as the land grows ever more unkind, there is talk of war. The political instability that had been simmering beneath the surface now begins to boil over. It's hard to imagine the level of chaos that internal strife can bring to a society. The Maya, though highly advanced in their astronomical and mathematical knowledge, were deeply political people. Their cities were ruled by powerful families who controlled both the military and religious life. These families were not just concerned with governance, they were concerned with divine legitimacy. The Maya believed their rulers were descendants of the gods, chosen to maintain cosmic order on Earth. This belief gave their rulers immense power, but it also made them vulnerable. When those rulers began to fight amongst themselves, it was more than just a political failure. It was a threat to the very cosmic order that the Maya held dear. You walk through the city now, and the signs of conflict are everywhere. The murals that once depicted scenes of divine rulers and victorious battles are now marked with signs of violence. You can see the fractures in the political system, the way the once unified power structures have begun to break apart. The struggle for power between cities like Tikal and Calakmul had escalated into all-out war. Cities that once relied on their trade and alliances now turned inward, battling not just nature, but each other. And as the war between rival factions intensified, the support of the common people, farmers, artisans and merchants, began to wane. You wonder what the people of this city thought as they saw their rulers turn on each other. Perhaps they still believed that the gods would favour one side, that the war would have a clear winner, but you start to realise that in such a time of crisis, when the resources are stretched thin and the environment is turning hostile, there are no real winners, only survivors. Historians still argue whether this political fragmentation contributed to the Maya collapse, or if it was simply another symptom of a deeper, more pervasive problem. Was it the drought that weakened the city-states, or was it the internal division that left the Maya unable to respond to the growing crisis? Many argue that political instability was the last nail in the coffin for the Maya. As the cities fought among themselves, their ability to manage their environment, sustain their people, and defend against external threats weakened. Now, as you stand among the ruins of this once thriving city, you can almost hear the echoes of the past. You can hear the whispers of rulers and priests, their voices filled with the hope that their struggle would lead to salvation. But in the end, the Maya's greatest battle wasn't against the elements or their enemies, it was against their own divided society. The cracks in the political system were just as deadly as the droughts, and together they tore the Maya civilization apart. As the cities crumbled, the people began to retreat into the jungles seeking refuge from the collapse of their world. Let's slow down for a moment, standing quietly in the ruins of the once vibrant Maya city. The wind whispers through the empty streets, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and age. The silence is palpable, but there's something else, something deeper that perhaps only the most perceptive can feel. The Maya believed in the power of the gods, in forces far beyond their control, forces that dictated the rise and fall of empires, the seasons, and the fate of all living things. But the gods weren't distant beings. They were present in every aspect of life, from the food they ate to the rituals they performed. When the environment began to falter and political unrest spread through the city, it was inevitable that the Maya would turn to their faith for guidance. In times of crisis, their religion became more than just a belief. It became a lifeline, a way to explain the unexplainable. As you walk among the ruins, you can almost sense how deeply embedded their faith was in their daily life. The Maya believed that their rulers were directly connected to the gods, that the high priests had the power to call upon divine forces to help them in times of need. When the droughts began, and crops began to fail, it's no surprise that the Maya turned to religion to explain it. Their gods, after all, were thought to control the forces of nature. But as the years dragged on with no end to the drought, it must have been incredibly difficult to keep the faith. Could the gods be angry? Had they abandoned the Maya? The Maya performed elaborate ceremonies to appease their gods, and their cities were dotted with temples and altars where sacrifices were made. But these rituals, powerful as they were, couldn't stop the environmental collapse, and as the droughts worsened, the people must have felt an ever-growing sense of abandonment, as if the gods themselves were ignoring their cries for help. Imagine the growing desperation among the people who had trusted that their gods would deliver them. When the rains didn't come, when the crops failed, and when the wars between cities turned their once beautiful world into a battleground, their faith would have been tested to its limits. Historians still debate the role of religion in the Mayas' decline. Some believe that religious leaders played a part in prolonging the collapse by offering false hope, promising divine intervention when the truth was far more mundane. Others argue that the Mayas' deep connection to their gods was what kept them going in the face of overwhelming odds. The question remains, did their faith help them through the worst of times, or did it keep them from finding practical solutions to the problems they faced? The debate rages on, and in the silence of the abandoned cities, it feels as though the answer lies hidden within the stones themselves. One thing is certain, the Mayas' religion, their belief in the gods and the cycles of nature, was integral to their worldview. But when the cycles of nature turned against them, when the rains refused to come and the crops failed, it's easy to imagine how their faith began to fray. It's likely that some Maya may have lost faith altogether, while others clung to their rituals as a final attempt to find meaning in the chaos. The sense of cosmic disorder that followed the collapse must have felt like the ultimate betrayal. How could a society so deeply tied to religion be abandoned by the very forces they had worshipped for centuries? And as you stand in the midst of this vast emptiness, you start to feel that overwhelming weight of belief and loss. The Maya were a people who lived their lives in constant communion with their gods, but when disaster struck, it was clear that no amount of rituals could turn back the clock. The gods were silent, and so, too, were the people. As the sun sets over the crumbling ruins, painting the once grand temples in a soft golden light, you can almost hear the sound of a distant market, of merchants shouting, of goods being exchanged, of tradesmen making their way through the busy streets. The Maya cities, once hubs of commerce and trade, were not just places of power and religious importance, they were also economic powerhouses. These cities were connected by an extensive network of trade routes, stretching across Central America and into the distant corners of Mesoamerica. The Maya, known for their expertise in various crafts, traded goods like jade, textiles, pottery, and obsidian. The wealth that flowed through these cities was immense. The exchange of goods brought prosperity, ensuring that the urban centres continued to grow and thrive, even as the population boomed. Imagine walking down one of those bustling streets where traders from distant lands sell exotic goods, feathers from the tropical birds of the rainforest, colourful pottery crafted by skilled artisans, and obsidian blades sharper than anything you could imagine. The Maya were masters of creating and trading goods that were both beautiful and functional, but as the climate began to change and the environment grew harsher, the once thriving trade networks began to fall apart. The roads became difficult to traverse, the rivers that had once been highways of trade ran dry, and the Maya cities, once thriving trade centres, became isolated. The collapse of these trade networks is a crucial factor in the Maya's eventual downfall. The Maya had come to rely heavily on external trade to support their complex society. In fact, much of the wealth that funded the construction of the grand temples, palaces and pyramids came from the trade of luxury goods. But when the trade routes collapsed, these cities were left to fend for themselves. With crops failing, water sources dwindling, and the constant threat of political instability, the Maya found themselves unable to maintain the high standards of living they had once enjoyed. Historians still argue whether the breakdown of trade networks was a direct cause of the Maya collapse, or whether it was simply another symptom of their overall decline. Some suggest that the failure of trade routes accelerated the process, while others believe that the Maya were already facing too many internal problems to recover, and the loss of trade merely sped up their downfall. Either way, the collapse of the trade networks left the Maya cities vulnerable. It was like watching a once thriving empire slowly unravel, each thread coming undone, one after the other, until there was nothing left to hold it together. You can almost feel the isolation of the city as it becomes more and more disconnected from the outside world. The once constant flow of goods and wealth that sustained this civilization is now a thing of the past. The streets, once filled with the sounds of lively trade, are now quiet, and with that quiet comes a realization. The Maya, who had once been at the forefront of global trade, now found themselves isolated in a world that had moved on. The end of their trade routes was just another blow in a long series of challenges, each one pushing them closer to the brink. As you look around at the structures that once housed the wealth and power of a society, you can almost feel the loss in the air, the loss of connections, of prosperity, and of a way of life that had been built on commerce and community. The Maya might have been ahead of their time in so many ways, but in the end it was their inability to adapt to the changing world around them, whether through environmental collapse, political strife, or the breakdown of trade, that led to the silent abandonment of their cities. Imagine walking through the dense jungles of Central America, surrounded by the towering trees and the thick, humid air that the Maya once called home. In the distance, you can just make out the ruins of a great city, Tikal perhaps, with its towering pyramids and sprawling plazas, but as you draw closer, something doesn't seem right. The earth under your feet is cracked, dry, and withered, and the once verdant landscape is slowly giving way to dust and decay. The crops that once fed this thriving civilization have withered. The rivers that once teemed with life are now dry beds, with only the faintest trickle of water. The Maya, known for their advanced agricultural techniques, found themselves facing a crisis unlike anything they had ever known. The environment, once so kind to them, had begun to fail them. The decline of agriculture was a slow and insidious process, one that unfolded over years, perhaps even decades. Yet its consequences were devastating. The Maya, as advanced as they were, had built their civilization in the heart of the tropical rainforest. The region's warm, wet climate was perfect for growing crops like maize, beans, and squash. With their sophisticated irrigation systems and terraced farming methods, the Maya were able to cultivate enough food to support large, densely populated cities. But as their population grew, so did the pressure on the land. In their quest to expand their cities and support their growing population, the Maya began to clear large swaths of forest, cutting down trees to make way for new agricultural fields and urban developments. It wasn't just the deforestation that led to the collapse of Maya agriculture, though. As the trees were cut down and the soil was exposed to the elements, the once fertile land began to erode. The rich topsoil, which had supported generations of crops, was washed away by heavy rains, leaving behind barren land that could no longer support the same agricultural output. Without the forest to act as a natural barrier against the erosion, the Maya found themselves fighting a losing battle against the land itself. The soil that had once been rich and fertile became dry and cracked, and the once thriving fields of maize and other crops slowly withered. As the agricultural base of the Maya economy collapsed, so did the structure of society itself. The cities, which had relied on the steady production of food, began to face widespread famine. The people, once accustomed to abundance, now found themselves struggling to survive. The once loyal farmers, who had worked the land for generations, saw their crops fail and their livelihoods disappear. The effects of this agricultural collapse were devastating. Without food to sustain them, the population began to dwindle, and as hunger spread, so did social unrest. People who once lived in harmony with the land now found themselves fighting for survival. The political system, already weakened by internal strife and division, could no longer provide the stability that the Maya needed to weather the storm. The rulers, who had once held the keys to the cosmos, now found themselves powerless to protect their people. As the crops failed and the rivers dried up, the Maya cities began to crumble one by one. Historians still argue whether the agricultural collapse was the singular cause of the Maya's downfall, or whether it was simply one of many contributing factors. Could they have adapted to the changing environment? Some believe that with the right technological advances or a shift in their agricultural practices, the Maya could have survived. Others argue that the destruction of the environment, combined with political and social turmoil, made recovery impossible. Whatever the cause, the consequences were the same. The once great Maya cities, built on the backs of farmers who had perfected the art of agriculture, were now deserted, their fields lying fallow and their once productive landscapes turned to dust. Now, standing among the ruins of this once thriving civilization, you can almost hear the whisper of the wind through the empty streets. The sound of life, of people toiling in the fields and trading goods in the markets, is long gone. The Maya civilization, with all its knowledge, culture, and innovation, is now a distant memory. But as you look around at the landscape that once supported such a vibrant society, you realize that the true lesson of the Maya lies not in their rise to power, but in the slow, painful unraveling of their world. In the end, it wasn't just the environment that defeated the Maya, it was their inability to adapt to the forces they had set into motion. The silence grows heavier now as you step deeper into the heart of the Maya world. No longer do you hear the chatter of daily life or the chants of priests invoking the gods. Instead, you feel the weight of a mystery, the question of why these cities were abandoned so suddenly. There were no clear indications of violence, no signs of a catastrophic event. Instead, it seems as though the Maya simply decided to leave, to vanish without a trace. This eerie abandonment has puzzled historians and archaeologists for years. What happened? Why did such a sophisticated civilization, with a strong grip on knowledge, trade and politics, decide to withdraw into the dense jungles from which they came? One of the key pieces of the puzzle lies in the very nature of the Maya society itself. These city-states were incredibly complex, each ruled by its own dynasty, with its own local politics and priorities. While this system allowed for rich diversity in culture and governance, it also made it incredibly fragile. The rise and fall of one city could have profound effects on the others. Cities like Tikal and Calakmul were locked in a constant state of political rivalry, with alliances and wars shifting like sand. This infighting drained resources and energy, while also creating a fractured society where communication and cooperation between regions were difficult at best. In the face of environmental pressures, drought, deforestation and agricultural collapse, this political fragmentation likely made it even harder for the Maya to respond in unison. Each city-state was too concerned with its own survival to offer meaningful support to the others. The once impressive alliances that held the Maya cities together slowly dissolved. As cities fought internal battles for power, they were less able to focus on the survival of their people. And as the environment worsened, this political instability only grew, leaving the cities increasingly vulnerable to collapse. Historians still debate the exact role of political instability in the Maya's downfall. Some argue that the fracturing of the political system was the primary cause of the collapse, while others suggest that the environmental factors, such as drought and deforestation, played the more dominant role. One thing that is certain, however, is that the combination of both environmental and political factors created a perfect storm that led to the downfall of the Maya cities. The inability of the Maya to reconcile their internal divisions and the challenges posed by a changing environment ultimately sealed their fate. But there's another layer to this story, something that can't be overlooked: the psychological toll that such a collapse would have had on the Maya people. As the droughts continued and the crops failed, there must have been an overwhelming sense of dread in the air. The Maya believed deeply in the cyclical nature of time, and the importance of maintaining harmony with the gods and the cosmos. When the rains failed to come, when the crops withered, and when the political system fractured, it's easy to imagine how the people began to lose faith, not just in their rulers, but in the very forces that had once given their lives meaning. This loss of faith was likely a slow process, a gradual erosion of belief as the physical world around the Maya crumbled. They had always turned to their gods in times of trouble, performing rituals and sacrifices to appease the divine forces. But what happens when the gods no longer seem to answer? What happens when the world you once trusted begins to betray you? The psychological burden of such uncertainty must have been immense. The Maya had no way of understanding the true cause of their suffering, whether it was a divine punishment or simply a series of unfortunate circumstances, and that uncertainty must have been one of the most crushing elements of their downfall. In the end, the Maya did not fall in a single moment of violence or destruction. Instead, their society crumbled in slow motion, piece by piece, as they grappled with the complex interplay of environmental, political and psychological factors. It was a quiet collapse, a disappearance into the jungle with no grand final battle or cataclysmic event to mark the end. And as you walk among the ruins of this once great civilization, it's clear that the mystery of the Maya's fall is not one that can be easily solved. It was not just the droughts, the wars, or the deforestation that caused their downfall. It was the culmination of these forces, combined with the deep psychological toll of watching their world fall apart, that ultimately led to the silence that remains. You can feel the weight of history pressing in on you now, the silence of these ruins growing even more profound as you step deeper into the jungle. What once was a thriving civilization, filled with life, activity and purpose, is now a world of desolation. In the distance, a broken pyramid rises out of the trees, a silent sentinel to a past that has almost been forgotten. The Maya's cities, once filled with the sounds of prayer, the clattering of trade and the rumble of ceremonies, now lie abandoned. The vibrant societies they built have disappeared, leaving only these crumbling stone structures behind. But the story of the Maya's disappearance is far from simple. The truth is, what happened to these cities is not just a tale of environmental collapse or political upheaval. It's the story of how a civilization met its end, not in a single catastrophic moment, but through a slow, painful unravelling, one that took place over generations and left behind only ruins and unanswered questions. At the heart of the Maya collapse was something that many don't fully understand: the environmental collapse. The Maya were not simply victims of their own overreach. They had learned to work with the land for centuries, using techniques that maximised their ability to grow crops in a challenging environment. But as the population grew, as the cities expanded, the balance that they had carefully cultivated was thrown into disarray. The trees that once stood tall and provided vital resources for the people were cut down to make room for more people, more settlements, more temples, more power. Deforestation became a significant issue. No longer were the dense jungles of the region capable of regenerating quickly enough to keep up with the needs of the ever-expanding cities. And once the trees were gone, the soil beneath them began to erode, leaving the land exposed to the harsh elements. In the beginning, the Maya may not have realized the extent of the damage they were causing. It's easy to imagine that with each new layer of civilization, they could have seen the loss of trees and forests as a small price to pay for progress. After all, the Maya were masters of agriculture, crafting sophisticated systems for irrigation and terrace farming. They had a deep understanding of the land and its cycles. But even the most advanced civilizations can't escape the natural laws of the environment. As the trees disappeared and the soil began to erode, the land became less and less able to support the crops that had once sustained the growing population. The once fertile soil that had fed the Maya for generations became dry, cracked, and barren. The droughts that had already begun to plague the region only made matters worse. This gradual degradation of the environment might not have been immediately felt by the Maya, but over time it began to have a devastating effect on their cities. As the crops failed, food became increasingly scarce, and the once thriving agricultural systems faltered. You can imagine the farmers, once proud of their ability to grow food for the entire city, now staring at fields that refused to yield their bounty. The once productive lands began to dry up, and with them the livelihoods of countless people. The Maya, who had once built their society upon the land's ability to provide, now found themselves facing a harsh and unforgiving environment. It wasn't just the land that was under strain, though. As food became harder to come by, so did the ability to support the intricate systems that made the Maya civilization so remarkable. The elite rulers, who had long relied on tribute from the people, began to feel the effects of the collapsing agricultural system. The great cities, which had been centres of power and trade, began to show signs of decay. The once grand temples, which had been the epicentre of religious and political life, now stood empty. The monumental pyramids that had been constructed with such care were slowly overtaken by creeping vines and the encroaching jungle. It was a slow death, but a death nonetheless. The people of the Maya cities must have been caught in a cycle of despair. Each year the crops would fail again, and the once fertile land would yield less and less. The political structure that had once been so powerful and organised began to fragment. The Maya elite, who had once enjoyed the fruits of their civilization, now found themselves powerless against the forces of nature. The rulers could no longer ensure the prosperity of the cities. The gods, who had once been invoked to bring about the rain, no longer seemed to listen. The rituals and sacrifices that had been part of their daily lives no longer had the same effect. The gods themselves appeared silent, and as the years went by, the Maya began to lose hope. The collapse of agriculture was the final blow that struck the heart of the Maya cities. The collapse was not instantaneous. It was a gradual, creeping process that took place over decades. But the signs were there, if only the Maya had been able to recognize them in time. The loss of food, the depletion of resources, and the inability to adapt to the changing climate ultimately caused the people of the Maya cities to abandon their once great civilization. The great cities, which had once been the pride of the Maya, were now empty, their towering pyramids and temples standing silent as a reminder of a forgotten world. You stand alone now in the center of what was once one of the grandest cities in the Maya world, surrounded by towering ruins, the jungle creeping in around you, slowly reclaiming what it once lost. The air is thick with the weight of the past, and as you look around, you wonder, how could such a mighty civilization have vanished without a single trace, without even a fight? What happened to the people who once lived here, who built these towering pyramids and intricate temples, whose knowledge of the stars and the earth was unparalleled? There are no signs of battle or destruction, no burned buildings, no charred ruins. Instead, the Maya simply left, quietly, without a word. They abandoned their cities, their homes, their sacred places, and disappeared into the dense jungle. It's one of the most striking features of the Maya collapse, the absence of any obvious cause. Unlike other ancient civilizations, such as the Romans or the Egyptians, whose falls were marked by conquest or invasion, the Maya seem to have simply walked away. Historians and archaeologists have long puzzled over this mystery. Why would a civilization that had achieved so much, both culturally and intellectually, simply vanish? What could have caused them to abandon their cities so completely, leaving behind only the skeletal remains of their once great civilization? Was it the climate, the political strife, or something deeper, something more elusive? One theory, which has gained traction in recent years, is that the Maya, in their advanced civilization, were simply not prepared for the environmental disaster that struck. The droughts that plagued the region, which were likely exacerbated by the deforestation they had caused, created a situation where the land could no longer sustain the population. As crops failed, food shortages became widespread. Without enough food to support the population, the cities became untenable. The rich temples and palaces that had once symbolized power and grandeur now stood empty, their grand facades crumbling and overtaken by the jungle. The political fragmentation that had begun to take root long before the environmental collapse may have made matters worse. The Maya lived in a fragmented world where each city-state was ruled by its own king or lord, and these rulers were constantly vying for power. Tikal and Calakmul, two of the largest cities in the Maya world, were locked in a bitter rivalry for centuries, constantly shifting alliances and battling one another. This division weakened the overall stability of the civilization, and when the droughts hit, it left the Maya cities vulnerable. Without strong leadership and unity, they were unable to coordinate a response to the growing environmental crisis. The cities were left to fend for themselves, and as the agricultural base of their society eroded, they simply couldn't survive. There is also the possibility that the Maya, who had long been deeply connected to their religious beliefs, may have seen the decline as a sign of divine displeasure. The Maya were not just a people who lived in the physical world, they also lived in a world shaped by the gods, by celestial forces, and by cycles of time. When the rains failed to come, and when their crops withered, they may have believed that the gods had abandoned them. Their grand temples and pyramids, which were once places of worship and power, may have become places of despair. The rulers, who had once seen themselves as divine intermediaries, may have lost faith in their own ability to maintain the balance between the earthly and the divine. This crisis of faith, combined with the physical collapse of their environment and their cities, may have been too much for the Maya to bear, and so they left. The people of the great Maya cities packed up and disappeared into the jungle, leaving behind the remains of a once great civilization. They left their homes, their sacred places, and their rulers behind, and as they vanished into the jungle, they took with them the knowledge and secrets of a civilization that had once been one of the most advanced in the world. The empty ruins that remain today, covered in vines and slowly sinking into the earth, are a silent reminder of a lost world. Historians continue to debate the reasons for the Maya collapse, but one thing is clear: it wasn't a sudden, catastrophic event. It was a slow unravelling, a gradual decline that took place over decades. The Maya didn't just fall, they faded away one city at a time, leaving behind only their ruins and the mystery of their disappearance. As you stand in the shadow of their forgotten cities, you're reminded of the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. What seems permanent, what seems invincible, can all too easily be swept away by forces beyond our control. The further you wander into the heart of this forgotten world, the more you sense the magnitude of the mystery surrounding the Maya's disappearance. The abandoned temples and empty plazas seem to watch you silently, as though they hold their secrets close, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. The stone carvings and hieroglyphs, now eroded and weathered by centuries of neglect, seem to whisper of the once thriving culture that gave birth to them. But despite all the knowledge and skill the Maya had, the cause of their sudden departure remains elusive, a riddle locked deep within the jungle. There are many theories as to why the Maya abandoned their great cities. Some have argued that it was the violence and instability created by internal political struggles that led to their downfall. The Maya, as we've seen, were no strangers to warfare. Their cities were often embroiled in power struggles, with each city-state vying for dominance. But as much as this internal conflict may have worn down their society, it's unlikely that it was the sole cause of the collapse. After all, civilizations have weathered political turmoil before. What sets the Maya apart is the unique combination of factors that converge to bring their society to its knees. Among the most compelling theories is the one that suggests climate change played a critical role. The Maya had lived in harmony with the land for centuries, but this balance was disrupted when prolonged droughts began to devastate the region. The ancient Maya relied heavily on their agricultural system, and when the rain stopped coming, the crops failed. The soil, already weakened by deforestation, could no longer provide the food needed to sustain the population. As the agricultural system crumbled, so did the social order. Famine, scarcity, and a collapse in the distribution of resources would have caused widespread unrest. Historians still argue whether these droughts were the primary cause of the Maya collapse, or simply a contributing factor to a larger set of problems. Some point out that the Maya had experienced periods of drought before, yet managed to adapt and survive. Others argue that the severity and duration of the droughts during this particular period were unlike anything the Maya had encountered. What's clear, however, is that the Maya, once so attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, were no longer able to withstand the forces of nature they had long understood and revered. The land that had sustained them for so long could no longer give them the resources they needed, and the environmental collapse that followed left them with few options for survival. In addition to the physical collapse of the environment, there was also the mental and emotional toll that this crisis would have had on the Maya people. Their entire society, from the ruling elite to the common people, had been built upon the understanding that they were in sync with the cosmos, that their rituals and sacrifices ensured the continued favour of the gods. But as the droughts persisted and the crops failed, the very foundation of their belief system was shaken. The gods, who had once been the source of their power and prosperity, seemed silent. The once reliable rhythms of nature no longer played out in predictable cycles. For a people whose lives were so intertwined with their faith, the collapse of their agricultural system and the failure of the rains must have felt like the ultimate betrayal. The Maya were not the only civilization to face such a crisis, but their response, or lack of response, was what ultimately led to their disappearance. Instead of finding a way to adapt to the changing environment, or to address the internal political divisions, they seemed to retreat inward. They abandoned their cities, their temples, their homes, and disappeared into the jungles. Whether they fled in desperation, or whether they simply chose to withdraw from the world they had created, is a question that remains unanswered. But one thing is certain: the Maya left behind more than just their cities. They left behind a profound mystery. In the years since the collapse of the Maya civilization, many have tried to unlock the secrets of their disappearance. Archaeologists have uncovered vast cities hidden beneath the jungle canopy, revealing the complexity and sophistication of the Maya world. But despite the knowledge we've gained, there are still countless questions that remain unanswered. Why did they leave? Was it the collapse of their environment? Was it political instability? Or was it a combination of factors that led them to abandon everything they had built? The mystery of the Maya collapse is one that continues to fascinate and elude us. As you walk through the silent ruins, you're reminded of just how fragile even the most advanced civilizations can be. The Maya, once masters of their world, were unable to escape the forces of nature, the pressures of political strife, and the collapse of their environment. And in their silence they left us with a profound lesson. No matter how far we advance, how much we build, or how much we know, we're always subject to the forces of the world around us. And sometimes those forces can be far stronger than we are. As the jungle continues to encroach on the ruins, the stillness becomes almost unbearable. The Maya world, once a shining example of human achievement, is now buried beneath layers of time, nature, and mystery. You can't help but feel the weight of what has been lost, as though the very air around you carries the echoes of a society that had everything: knowledge, culture, wealth, and yet, in the end, lost it all. The Maya cities that once stood as monuments to human ingenuity now serve as a quiet reminder of the fragility of civilization. They were a people who had reached the height of intellectual, architectural, and cultural achievement, and yet they could not escape the forces that ultimately tore them apart. But even in their absence, the Maya have left a profound legacy. It's not just the grand temples, the incredible pyramids, or the remnants of their cities that continue to speak to us. It's their intellectual achievements, their ability to understand the natural world in ways that were centuries ahead of their time. The Maya were master astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers. They mapped the stars with incredible accuracy, creating calendars so precise that modern scientists still study them today. Their knowledge of the heavens allowed them to track celestial events, predict eclipses, and understand the cycles of the moon and sun. They even had a complex written language that, while only partially deciphered, still holds clues to their understanding of the world around them. And then there were their architectural achievements, pyramids, temples, palaces, that stood as testaments to their advanced understanding of engineering. The Maya built towering structures, some of which were aligned with the stars, demonstrating a level of sophistication in both design and purpose. These cities were not just functional, they were symbols of the Maya's connection to the divine, their rulers, and the cosmos. Every building, every stone was placed with intent, guided by the stars and the gods. Even as you stand among the ruins, looking at the broken remnants of a once great civilization, you can see the markers of this brilliance. The carvings, worn with age, still hint at a time when the Maya could read the language of the stars like no other civilization before them. The temples that still rise from the ground, albeit cracked and weathered, speak of a society that had an extraordinary understanding of mathematics, geometry, and the physical world. They were a civilization that had touched the divine, and in their heights they reached for the heavens themselves. But despite all their brilliance, the Maya's downfall came not through external invaders, but through a combination of factors that were beyond their control. The environmental collapse, the deforestation, the droughts, all of these played a role, but it was the internal fractures, the political instability, and the loss of belief in the very foundation of their society that ultimately caused their collapse. The Maya, once united by a shared belief in the divine and their rulers, fractured under the weight of their own internal divisions. The rulers, once seen as divine intermediaries, could no longer maintain the cosmic balance they had once believed in. And in the face of failure, they did what any people would do. They fled. The mystery of the Maya collapse is not just about understanding the cause, it's about realizing the profound lessons it offers us today. As you stand here, amidst the ruins, you realize that their story is not just a tale of destruction, but of humanity's resilience in the face of overwhelming challenges. The Maya may have fallen, but their knowledge, their culture, their very essence lives on. The lessons they imparted about balance, about the fragility of civilization, and about the interconnectedness of all things are still relevant today. The Maya left us a powerful legacy, and while their cities may have fallen into silence, the lessons they imparted continue to resonate. The mystery of their disappearance, far from being a tragedy, is a reminder to us all that even the greatest civilizations can falter when they lose touch with the balance of the world around them. It's a call to understand the forces we cannot control, to recognize our place in the larger picture, and to respect the natural world that sustains us. As you leave the ruins behind and step into the dense jungle, you can't help but feel the weight of the past on your shoulders. The Maya may have vanished, but their story is far from over. Their cities may have crumbled, their temples may have fallen into ruin, but their legacy lives on. And perhaps, in that silence, in those empty streets, there's a message for all of us. No civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to the forces of nature, the struggles of society, or the passage of time. What endures is not the buildings, not the stones, but the lessons we learn from them. You continue walking through the thick jungle, where nature has long since reclaimed the space that once was a bustling city. The sound of your footsteps is muffled by the soft undergrowth and the humidity that hangs heavy in the air. The Maya, who once controlled vast expanses of land and had the power to move mountains, well, not literally, left behind only the faintest traces of their presence. It's almost as though they vanished into thin air, swallowed up by time and the relentless encroachment of the jungle. But in that very silence, There is an eerie beauty, an unsettling peace that speaks volumes. The Maya might have disappeared from the cities they built, but their presence is far from gone. Their legacy is still visible if you know where to look, scattered across the landscape, embedded in the very stones of the temples and pyramids they constructed with such care. The intricate carvings on the walls, worn by centuries of wind, rain and sun, tell stories of gods, rulers, and celestial events. These stories are not lost. They are simply waiting to be uncovered, like the secrets of a forgotten world that only those with the patience and dedication to search can truly unlock. And even though the cities are now silent, there is a strange, almost spiritual quality to these places. You begin to understand why these cities were built in the way they were, so intricately aligned with the stars, the cycles of nature, and the gods. The Maya believed that the physical world was intimately connected with the divine realm. Every stone they placed, every building they erected was done with the understanding that it had a sacred purpose. To them, their cities were more than just places to live. They were spaces of power, communication with the gods, and conduits to the heavens themselves. As you stand before one of the towering pyramids, its stones cracked and weathered but still standing firm, you get a sense of the incredible precision with which the Maya built these structures. The temples and pyramids weren't just physical structures, they were an embodiment of Maya cosmology. These buildings, aligned with celestial bodies, were symbolic representations of the Maya's connection to the divine and the cycles of nature. Their cities were designed to reflect the order of the universe, with sacred geometry guiding the placement of buildings and roads. These were not just architectural feats, they were spiritual statements, a way for the Maya to position themselves within the great cosmic balance. It's in these quiet moments, as you gaze up at the weathered stone and the creeping vines that now cover what was once a grand temple, that you truly begin to understand the magnitude of what the Maya lost and what they left behind. Their cities were filled with knowledge, with culture, and with life. But when the environmental collapse began to take its toll, when the droughts took their crops and the soil turned barren, the Maya didn't just lose their resources. They lost the very foundation of their belief system, the gods they had once relied on, the cosmic order they had once believed in, and the connection they had with the land. As the temples crumbled, so too did the fabric of their civilization. It wasn't just the land that became uninhabitable. It was the Maya's connection to the very forces they had once revered. Their belief in the cyclical nature of time, their reverence for the gods, and their reliance on the divine for guidance no longer held sway. As the droughts lengthened and the crops failed, the Maya began to lose faith, not just in their rulers or their priests, but in the gods themselves. This loss of faith, combined with the environmental devastation, caused the once unified Maya world to fracture. It's hard to imagine the sense of hopelessness that must have permeated the Maya cities in those final years. What happens to a people when the foundation of their belief system crumbles? When the gods they once trusted to bring rain, to ensure bountiful harvests, and to protect them from disaster seem to have turned away? The Maya, who had once lived in harmony with their environment and their faith, now found themselves facing a world that no longer made sense. The sky that once brought them rain now seemed indifferent. The crops that once flourished now refused to grow, and the rulers who once communicated with the gods were now powerless. The Maya didn't just disappear because of a sudden invasion, a foreign enemy, or a single battle. Their fall was the result of a slow, creeping collapse, one that began in the very soil beneath their feet. It was the loss of their connection to the land, to the gods, and to their belief in the cosmic order that ultimately led to their retreat. And as they withdrew into the jungle, abandoning their cities, their once great civilization was left to be reclaimed by nature, with only the ruins and the silence left behind to tell their story. But the Maya left us more than just ruins and unanswered questions. They left us with lessons. The story of their rise and fall is not just a history of a lost civilization. It's a warning to all who come after them. It reminds us that no civilization is immune to the forces of nature, to the ravages of time, or to the consequences of overreaching. It teaches us that even the most advanced societies can fall when they lose sight of their connection to the natural world, to the people they serve, and to the very forces that govern their existence. As the jungle continues to swallow the ruins, there's a sense of finality. The Maya have long since gone, but their story will never truly fade. It lives on in the stones, in the carvings, in the very air of these forgotten cities. And perhaps, in the silence that now surrounds them, there is a message for all of us. Civilizations rise, and civilizations fall, but it is the lessons we leave behind that endure. You sit quietly now among the ruins, the ancient stones around you whispering secrets of a world long gone. The jungle continues its relentless march forward, creeping over what was once a thriving city. In this quiet place, surrounded by the remnants of the Maya, you can't help but wonder, how did a civilization so advanced, so in tune with the stars and the forces of nature, come to this? The answer isn't simple, nor is it one that can be easily grasped. The Maya weren't just a people who felt climate change, political fragmentation, or internal strife. They were a civilization that reached too far, too fast, and paid the price for it. The thing about the Maya is that they were so ahead of their time. They had perfected agriculture in ways that many other civilizations could only dream of, crafting intricate irrigation systems and terraced farming methods to extract every possible resource from the land. Their knowledge of the stars and the heavens was extraordinary, so advanced in fact that they created some of the most accurate calendars known to man. Their cities were marvels of architecture, rising from the jungle floor like great temples to their gods. They built pyramids and palaces, and the artwork and carvings that adorned their buildings told stories of gods and kings, of battles and triumphs, of a civilization that believed itself to be at the center of the universe. But despite all of their accomplishments, the Maya couldn't escape the forces that had shaped their world, the very forces they had studied and revered. Their agricultural methods, once so successful, were eventually overwhelmed by the pressures of a growing population and a changing climate. The deforestation that had allowed their cities to flourish slowly turned against them, as the land they had once nurtured became depleted and unable to support their needs. The droughts that struck the region, made worse by their environmental practices, pushed their agricultural systems to the breaking point. And as the land withered, so too did the people. Food became scarce, social unrest spread, and the once proud cities began to fracture under the weight of their own decline. But it wasn't just the physical collapse that led to their downfall. There was also the emotional and psychological toll. The Maya had placed so much faith in the gods and the divine order of the universe that when the rains failed to come, when the crops refused to grow, and when the political system that had once held everything together began to crumble, their entire worldview was shattered. The cosmic order they had built their society upon had been disrupted, and with it, their belief in their rulers and their gods. They had always seen themselves as stewards of the earth, chosen by the gods to maintain balance in the world. But as nature began to turn against them, their faith in the divine order faltered, and without that faith, their society had nothing left to hold it together. The Maya collapse is a story not just of a civilization's downfall, but of the dangers of complacency, overreach, and the failure to adapt to changing circumstances. It's a cautionary tale for us all, reminding us that no matter how advanced we become, no matter how much we build, we are still subject to the forces of nature and the limits of our own environment. The Maya were masters of their world, but their downfall was a reminder that even the greatest civilizations are not invincible. As the years passed, the Maya abandoned their cities, retreating into the jungle from which they had come. The once great centers of power were left empty, and the ruins began to slowly fade from memory. The jungle took over, and nature quietly erased the evidence of a civilization that had once been the pinnacle of human achievement. The pyramids, temples, and plazas that had once stood as testaments to their brilliance were now nothing more than silent monuments to what had been lost. But the Maya didn't just disappear. They didn't vanish without a trace. The people didn't simply cease to exist. What remains today is a legacy, a set of ideas, a body of knowledge, and a culture that continues to influence the world. The Maya may have left behind their cities, but they did not leave behind their wisdom, their understanding of the cosmos, their innovations in agriculture, their architecture, and their art. All of these things continue to inspire us today. And in some ways, the Maya are not gone at all. Their legacy is still very much alive, hidden in the jungles, preserved in the ruins, and waiting for us to uncover the secrets they left behind. The collapse of the Maya civilization was a long, slow process. A combination of environmental factors, political instability, and a loss of faith that ultimately led to their retreat into the jungle. But it's not a story of defeat. It's a story of resilience. The Maya adapted, thrived, and achieved greatness, but in the end, they were also a people who learned that even the greatest civilizations are subject to the forces of time. Their cities may have crumbled, their temples may have fallen into ruin, but their legacy continues to shine through the cracks of history. As you sit here, surrounded by the remnants of this once great civilization, you realize that the Maya's story is not just about their fall, but about the power of knowledge, culture, and belief to endure. In the end, the Maya may have left their cities, but they did not leave their mark on the world. The ruins may be silent, but their story is far from over. The day is drawing to a close, and the air around you grows thick with the scent of earth and foliage. The jungle is alive with the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of creatures hidden in the underbrush. As you stand there, watching the last light of the setting sun filter through the dense canopy, you can't help but feel the weight of the history around you. The Maya civilization, with all its brilliance and complexity, has left behind a mystery that we may never fully understand, but in that mystery lies a profound lesson. For all the knowledge they amassed, for all the cities they built, and for all the gods they worshipped, the Maya could not prevent their own decline. They were a civilization that, despite their extraordinary achievements, was ultimately brought down by the very forces they had long studied and revered. The question of why the Maya left their cities remains unanswered, but perhaps the answer lies not in the specifics of their collapse, but in the broader themes of their civilization. The Maya were a people who understood the importance of balance between nature, society, and the divine. Their entire worldview was built on the belief that the cosmos operated in cycles, and that harmony with these cycles was essential for survival. But when those cycles began to shift, when the rain stopped coming, when the soil became barren, and when their political systems fractured, the Maya were no longer able to maintain that balance. It's a sobering thought, one that reminds us that no matter how advanced we become, no matter how much we learn, we are still bound by the natural world around us. It's easy to look at the Maya and think that their downfall was inevitable, that their fate was sealed the moment they began to push the limits of their environment. But it's important to remember that the Maya were not simply passive victims of their circumstances. They were innovators, engineers, and thinkers, capable of great ingenuity. Their achievements in agriculture, architecture, and astronomy were far ahead of their time. The collapse of their civilization was not a reflection of their inadequacy, but rather a reflection of the immense challenges they faced. And perhaps the greatest challenge of all was not the environment, but the inability to adapt to the changes around them. The Maya were masters of adaptation, until they weren't. They had survived for centuries by constantly adjusting to the world around them, learning to work with the land and the heavens. But when those forces began to shift beyond their control, when the droughts stretched on for years, when the soil became depleted and the cities began to fragment, they found themselves unable to adapt quickly enough. Their world had changed, and they could not keep up. And so, one by one, the great cities of the Maya were abandoned, their inhabitants disappearing into the jungle, leaving behind only the skeletal remains of a once great civilization. As you walk through the silent streets of the ruined city, the weight of the past presses down on you. It's hard not to wonder what happened to the people who lived here. Did they walk away in fear, driven by hunger and desperation? Or did they simply choose to leave, unable to face the crumbling world around them? The truth is, we may never know. What we do know is that the Maya were a civilization that lived at the crossroads of greatness and fragility, and that their downfall was not a sudden event, but a slow, creeping process that unfolded over generations. But even as you stand in the shadows of their former glory, you can't help but feel that the Maya are not truly gone. The legacy they left behind is not one of despair, but of resilience. They were a people who reached for the stars, who looked to the heavens for guidance and wisdom. Their pyramids, their temples, and their cities may have fallen, but the knowledge they imparted still exists, embedded in the earth beneath your feet and in the stars above your head. And as you gaze at the sky, at the same stars the Maya once mapped with such precision, you realize that their legacy is still very much alive. It's in the very air you breathe, in the soil that surrounds you, and in the stories that continue to be told about their remarkable civilization. Perhaps, then, the Maya did not vanish at all. Perhaps their true legacy lies in the lessons they left behind. Lessons about the fragility of civilization, the importance of balance, and the need to understand our place in the natural world. They were a people who saw the world in ways that many of us have yet to fully comprehend. They understood that the earth was not something to be conquered, but something to be respected. They built their cities with the knowledge that they were part of something greater, something cosmic. And even as their cities crumbled, as their civilization slowly faded away, their story is far from over. The ruins that remain are not just monuments to the past. They are a reminder that every civilization, no matter how great, is vulnerable. The Maya may have left their cities behind, but in the silence of those ruins, their story continues to resonate. The jungle has reclaimed what was once theirs, but the lessons they imparted, the importance of balance, the value of knowledge, and the need to live in harmony with the world, will live on forever. Night has now fully descended, and the stars above glimmer faintly through the dense canopy. The jungle around you hums with life, but here, in the ruins of a civilization, there is stillness, an eerie peace that carries with it the weight of history. You find yourself reflecting on all that has been lost, but also on all that remains. The Maya, in their infinite complexity, understood more than many of us realize. They knew the cycles of the moon, the behavior of the stars, the rhythms of the seasons. They understood the interconnectedness of everything, the land, the sky, the people, and how it was this balance that held the universe together. Yet they too were vulnerable to the forces they could no longer control. The collapse of the Maya civilization wasn't simply the fall of a society. It was the end of a worldview, a perspective that saw the human experience as an integral part of the cosmos. The Maya didn't just build cities. They constructed monuments to their gods and the heavens, aligning their buildings with the movements of the stars. Their pyramids weren't just structures of stone. They were physical manifestations of their understanding of the universe. The Maya believed that their actions, their rituals, their very lives were part of a cosmic dance, a dance that required harmony between the heavens and the earth. When that harmony was broken, when the climate changed and the rain stopped coming, when the crops failed and the cities began to fall into disrepair, the Maya found themselves at the mercy of forces beyond their comprehension. The fragile balance that had sustained their civilization for centuries was undone, and with it the very foundation of their society. But even in their fall, the Maya left behind something that transcends the ruins and the empty temples. Their knowledge, their understanding of the world, and their insights into the nature of time and space continue to echo through the centuries. The Maya, with their incredible achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and agriculture, didn't just create a civilization. They created a legacy that reminds us of the importance of balance, of living in harmony with the forces of nature, and of recognizing that no matter how far we advance, we are always part of something much greater than ourselves. As you stand here, amidst the ruins of their once great civilization, you can't help but be struck by the sense of connection that the Maya had with the land. Their cities were not built on a foundation of conquest or exploitation. They were built on a deep understanding of the natural world and the forces that governed it. The Maya may have abandoned their cities, but they never truly abandoned their belief in the interconnectedness of all things. In their eyes, the earth was sacred, the sky was sacred, and their lives were part of an ongoing cycle. A cycle that they believed was governed by divine forces. The abandonment of the cities, the retreat into the jungle, was not just a physical departure, it was also a spiritual one. The Maya, who had once lived in harmony with their environment, now found themselves disconnected from the land they had once revered. Their rulers, who had once been seen as divine intermediaries between the gods and the people, could no longer fulfill their roles. The cities that had been built to reflect the cosmic order no longer served their purpose, and in the face of this collapse the Maya retreated inward, seeking refuge in the jungle that had always been both their home and their refuge. As you continue to walk through the silent ruins, you begin to understand that the Maya's retreat into the jungle was not a defeat. It was an acceptance, a recognition that the world they had built was no longer sustainable, that the balance they had once enjoyed was no longer possible. The Maya did not disappear. They evolved. They may have left their great cities behind, but they carried with them the knowledge of the stars, the understanding of the land, and the wisdom of their ancestors. The Maya may have vanished from the cities, but their culture, their way of life, continues to resonate today. In many ways, the Maya are still with us. Their descendants, though they may no longer live in the grand cities of the past, still carry the traditions and knowledge of their ancestors, and though the great temples and pyramids may lie in ruins, the story of the Maya is not over. It continues to be written in the stars above and in the earth beneath our feet. The Maya may have abandoned their cities, but they did not abandon their legacy. It lives on, waiting for us to rediscover it, to learn from it, and to carry it forward. As you leave the ruins behind, the sounds of the jungle enveloping you, you realize that the Maya, in their silence, have left us with a profound message. It is a message of resilience, of adaptability, and of the need to live in balance with the world around us. They may have disappeared, but their legacy continues to shine through the cracks of history, reminding us that we're all part of something much greater, something eternal. As the moon rises high above the jungle, casting its pale light over the ruins, you feel a deep sense of reverence for the past. The Maya civilization, with all its complexity, brilliance, and eventual tragedy, is a reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's overwhelming forces. It's a balance that has been tested throughout history and continues to be tested today. In a world where we too push the boundaries of what is possible, the story of the Maya serves as a warning, one that speaks not just to the past but to the present and the future. The Maya were extraordinary in many ways. They were masterful architects, skilled astronomers, and gifted artists. Their cities were marvels of engineering, their knowledge of the heavens unparalleled. Yet, despite all their achievements, they were unable to prevent the forces of nature from undoing their world. This raises a fundamental question. How do we, as individuals and as a society, reconcile our desire to build, to expand, and to progress with the reality of our fragility in the face of nature's power? The Maya understood their world in a way that few modern societies do. They recognized the interconnectedness of all things, their rulers, their people, their cities, and the earth itself. They saw the cosmos as a living, breathing entity, where every action had a cosmic consequence. When the rain failed, when the crops withered, and when the land no longer provided, the Maya didn't just see it as a loss, they saw it as a failure of balance. The very order of the universe, the sacred harmony that they had long revered, had been disrupted. And when that happened, their cities fell into disarray. But it wasn't just the physical collapse that marked the end of the Maya cities. It was the collapse of their world view. They had built their civilization on the understanding that the gods, the earth, and the people were all part of a sacred order. This cosmic connection gave them meaning and purpose. Without it, the very foundation of their society crumbled. And so the Maya withdrew from the cities, retreating into the jungle that had once been their sanctuary. They may have abandoned their cities, but they carried with them the knowledge that had sustained them for centuries. They left behind the monuments to their greatness, but they took with them the lessons learned from their rise and fall. The question we must ask ourselves as we look at the ruins of the Maya civilization is this: are we too caught in the same cycle? As we push forward, as we innovate and expand, are we doing so with the same understanding of our place in the natural world? The Maya believed that the earth and the heavens were intimately connected, and that maintaining harmony between them was essential for survival. But somewhere along the way, as their cities grew and their power expanded, they lost sight of that balance. They believed they could master nature, that they could conquer the world around them, and in doing so they set in motion a chain of events that ultimately led to their downfall. Today, we are faced with similar challenges. Climate change, deforestation, resource depletion, these are the issues that threaten our world, just as they threatened the Maya. We are pushing the boundaries of what is possible, just as they did. And while we have the technology and knowledge to understand the forces that shape our world, we are still grappling with the same question the Maya faced. How do we live in harmony with nature without overstepping our bounds? How do we ensure that our ambition doesn't come at the cost of the world around us? The Maya were in many ways ahead of their time. They had a profound understanding of the cycles of the earth, the movements of the stars, and the forces that shaped their world. They knew that the earth was not something to be conquered, but something to be respected. And yet, despite all their wisdom, they too succumbed to the forces they could not control. In this, there is a lesson for us all. We may have the power to shape the world around us, but we must also recognize that we are not masters of the universe. We are part of a much larger system, one that operates on cycles beyond our understanding. The Maya's story is not just one of loss, it is also a story of resilience. The lessons they left behind are still relevant today. We may have abandoned the old ways of the Maya, but the wisdom they imparted lives on. It lives in the ruins, in the stars, and in the land they once revered. And if we are wise, we will learn from their story. We will remember that our actions have consequences, that the world around us is fragile, and that the balance we seek can be disrupted in an instant. As you sit quietly, watching the stars above and the ruins around you, you realize that the Maya's story is still being written. It is being written in the choices we make today, the way we interact with the natural world, the way we build our societies, and the way we balance progress with sustainability. The Maya may have left their cities behind, but their story continues to resonate in the lessons they imparted. The ruins may stand in silence, but their message is as clear as ever. Harmony with the world around us is the key to our survival, and it is only when we lose that balance that we begin to crumble. As the final chapter of the night unfolds, the moon casts its gentle light over the ruins, bathing the once glorious Maya temples in an ethereal glow. You stand there, immersed in the silence of the abandoned city, the jungle stretching out endlessly before you, reclaiming what was once its own. The great pyramids and crumbling palaces are still here, but they have become more than just remnants of a lost civilization. They are symbols of human achievement and human fragility, of the heights we can reach and the depths to which we can fall. And in that silence a profound truth begins to dawn. The Maya are not gone. They live on, not just in the stones and the carvings, but in the very air we breathe, in the cycles of the earth, and in the lessons they imparted. In this moment, as you take in the vast emptiness around you, you come to understand that the Maya left behind more than just a civilization. They left behind a story that speaks to us across the centuries, urging us to remember the lessons they learned through triumph and failure. Their story is not one of complete loss, but of evolution. Just as they retreated into the jungle, perhaps we too must retreat into the wisdom of the past, to reconsider the path we are on and ask ourselves the difficult questions. How do we live in balance with the natural world? How do we ensure that our growth and progress do not come at the expense of the very earth that sustains us? The Mysas were not the first to build a civilization, and they will not be the last. But in their rise and fall, they provide a mirror through which we can see ourselves. Their greatest achievements were not just in their pyramids or their cities, but in their understanding of the cosmos and their place within it. They recognized that their lives were part of something greater, something that connected them to the heavens and the earth. They built their cities and temples to honor that connection, to honor the forces that shape their world. And yet, in the end, they too were swept away by the very forces they once revered. But perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The Maya were a people who reached for the stars, who sought to understand the universe and their place in it, and in their pursuit of knowledge and balance, they left behind a legacy that transcends time and place. The knowledge they gathered, the cities they built, and the stories they told continue to speak to us, even in their absence. They remind us that we too are part of the cosmic order, that our actions have consequences, that our connection to the world around us is sacred, and that we must respect the forces that shape our lives. As the night deepens and the jungle settles into its natural rhythm, the ruins around you begin to feel less like relics of a forgotten past and more like guardians of a message. The Maya may have vanished from their cities, but their story is still very much alive. It's a story of human triumph and tragedy, of wisdom and folly, of progress and destruction. But most of all, it is a story of balance, the delicate balance between nature, society, and the divine. The Maya understood that the world was not a place to conquer, but a place to live in harmony with. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson they left behind. As you stand in the shadow of the Great Pyramids, looking out over the jungle that has claimed the city, you realize that the Maya didn't truly disappear. Their legacy, like the stars they once mapped, continues to shine. And as we face the challenges of our own time, climate change, environmental degradation, and social unrest, we would do well to remember their story, because in that story there is not just the tragedy of a lost civilization, but the wisdom of a people who understood the true cost of imbalance, and the enduring power of knowledge, harmony, and respect for the natural world. The ruins may be silent, but their message is not. The Maya may have abandoned their cities, but they did not abandon their wisdom. And as we continue to navigate the complexities of our own world, it is up to us to listen, to learn, and to carry their legacy forward. Because in the end, it is not just the cities we build that define us. It is the balance we maintain with the world around us, 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 with the world around us,